The cover page of One Punch Man Chapter 183, titled Trade-Off, yet again features Murata's favorite character, Fubuki. To kick things off, we have an aerial shot of the area surrounding the Hero Association's headquarters and housing complex. With this many craters, it looked like they had established a base on the moon. We would then be taken just outside of Saitama's apartment, as a trail of footprints can be seen leading towards it. After finally making it back to the comfort of his own home, Saitama would begin to inspect and dust off his feet. Although he was completely unharmed during his encounter with Tatsumaki, Saitama's clothes were in rough shape, so he figured it would be a good idea to buy some replacements. But looking up, he would notice something surprising in his home. But first, thanks to Opera GX for sponsoring this video. Opera GX has been fine-tuning itself to be the perfect browser for anyone who wants something extra out of their web experience. From gamers to anime fans, or anyone looking for high performance. The GX store has a bunch of mods, designed to help you make the browser look, sound, and feel exactly how you want it. Whether you'd like a general anime aesthetic, or something specific to your favorite fandom, Opera has you covered. They even have fully animated wallpaper options. It's all easy to add or remove with just one click on the mod page. It's very practical too, with a smooth video pop-out feature to let you watch your favorite anime while working on other tabs. One click and it'll stick with you through every tab you open. With direct integration of your social apps like Discord and Instagram on the sidebar, and a quick import feature to let you swap in from another browser, Opera is ready for anything. So what are you waiting for? Use our link below to download Opera GX today. As seated around a small wooden table would be the same A-class neighbors from before: Chain and Toad, Butterfly DX, and Forte, all of whom Saitama wasn't really happy to see. After all, nobody invited them over, and so far they have only been a headache for him. They should have at least asked for permission before barging in and making themselves comfortable. But instead of responding to Saitama's words here, Butterfly DX would explain that Forte has something he wants to say. As while removing his hat and sunglasses, Forte would call out to Saitama by his name and even apologize for before. He challenged Saitama to a fight and ended up getting hit by a car in a parking lot. And even after that, he was already planning on getting his revenge. But after what he saw in the hospital, that's all a thing of the past. Having overheard Saitama as he entered the apartment, Forte would propose that as long as Saitama doesn't mind them being used, he can replace his ruined clothes and shoes with Forte's old ones. He'd even tell Saitama that there are some cool shops in the facility that they could go check out together sometime. After losing his original home, Saitama has been very limited in the clothing department. Even his hero costume was completely destroyed during the Monster Association arc. A new look may be just over the horizon for Saitama now. But this sudden shift of character from Forte was creeping Saitama out. But Forte would not let this stop him. Instead of expecting Saitama to bow down to them as a new addition to the A-class listing, Forte would now say that they are all A-class buddies, and he's looking forward to working with Saitama, which was really weird to everyone. But listen, after seeing what Saitama can really do, at least Forte didn't convince himself of something completely different to maintain his grip on reality like so many other people have. He immediately came to terms with the fact that he is not him and decided to be a fan instead. I mean, it's hard to blame him. As he followed the others out of the apartment while walking with crutches, Forte will tell Saitama to let him know if anything else ends up bothering him, which Saitama would uncomfortably agree to do. Imagine being the strongest being in the known universe and everyone just thinks you're a no-name superhero. Saitama is finally beginning to be recognized for his strength, and it is a really weird experience. Outside of the apartment, Butterfly DX would wonder what was going on with Forte, even going as far as to question if being hit by a car gave him a new personality. But Forte was a lot more serious than he previously let on. After all, he saw Saitama fighting. According to him, Saitama's movements were otherworldly, that even if all three of them went at him at the same time, they probably wouldn't stand a chance. In fact, he doubted that they'd even be able to last 10 seconds. He's on a whole different level, which just goes to show that although he recognizes Saitama to be a powerhouse, Forte is still way off the mark when it comes to what Saitama is truly capable of. But even this is enough to shift him entirely. Butterfly would then tell him to not be so dramatic, urging Forte to instead go get some rest. But Forte was dead serious. He'd admit to his friends that the earthquake they all felt wasn't caused by a monster. In reality, it was the impact from Saitama's fighting. From there, he turned their attention elsewhere. Here, he would urge them all to take good care of Saitama's dog and monkey, since it'll be good to have him on their side. Meanwhile, some other heroes were checking out the piles of monster remains Saitama left underground. Something that Crescent Eyebrow would consider a scene straight out of hell. Lightning Max was at a loss. There were even more monster corpses on the level beneath them, and most of their bodies were beyond unrecognizable. His only conclusion being that they must have killed each other. And looking at the surrounding damage, it's clear that back when they were alive, these monsters were incredibly dangerous. Blue Fire couldn't believe that such troublesome monsters were being kept under their noses like this. He'd even begin to question the Hero Association's risk management, which is when Mountain Ape of the Blizzard group chimed in with what they'd been trying to tell them all along. After a bit of explanation, Blue Fire still wasn't convinced that a single A-class was able to take down all these demon-level monsters. He'd even wonder if they were all just seeing things, which they completely denied. Meanwhile, some Hero Association executives were in a conversation of their own. At this rate, these guys were bound to be in trouble after their dirty dealings with Tsukuyomi, the group of evil espers they now conveniently knew nothing about. According to them, they just so happened to have some free time and made their way down below. As now to his side, Gearspur would express his belief that eyelashes fell for their scheme. According to Gearspur, Tsukuyomi is a made-up secret society that's been an urban legend in Esper circles for ages. A completely ridiculous rumor with absolutely no merit at all. He'd even go as far as to say that maybe the survivors from the Monster Association decided to take back Psychos while pretending to have it be some sort of trade-off. After all, there were a good number of Espers in the Monster Association. A possibility that Eyelashes and Needlestar couldn't exactly deny, but were clearly unsure about. It looks like Gearspur might just be a sleeper agent. This wasn't exactly subtle, so we'll see how this plays out for him later on. Meanwhile, another executive was having a pretty good time smoking a cigar before being called by his name, Mr. McCoy. The person calling him over would be Fubuki, and the Mohawk member of her group we saw reveal something to her in the previous chapter. With a smile on her face, it was clear that Fubuki had a pretty good plan in mind. She'd begin by pointing out that he'd secretly been keeping several demon-level monsters underground, ones that were never documented on the containment list, and those very same monsters endangered her group. Mr. McCoy's cover story was that the monsters were test subjects for a classified weapon being developed by Metal Knight, a lie Fubuki seemed to expect and not mind at all. And that's because she had evidence of him trying to sell the monsters to an outside organization for large sums of money. From here, the once confident executive would begin to sweat. The guy with the mohawk would explain the emergency lines they have are surprisingly easy to hack into. Fubuki would then begin to delicately threaten him with the dangers of this information going public. The executive would pause for a moment before asking Fubuki what she wanted. And when it comes to this sort of thing, Fubuki is clearly very confident. She'd suggest that while the nearby cameras are offline, they take the monster remains and scatter them out on the surface. That way, it would seem like Tatsumaki was fighting against a horde of rampaging monsters instead of developing a crush by literally trying to crush a guy. The added benefit of this would be that the rich people living in the apartment complex would trust them again, as ultimately they were protected by the best of the best. And as Fubuki said all this, Mr. McCoy's mouth was wide with amazement. Fubuki would like to avoid her sister getting into any trouble because of this incident. The plan sounded pretty good to Mr. McCoy, who was all too impressed by Fubuki, whose reputation precedes her. Moments later, the ground would begin to elevate like a giant pimple before exploding into a horrific spew of monster guts. Tatsumaki was spreading this stuff everywhere. After taking a look at the road, she noticed the car she was looking for with its passenger door open and a severed monster head to the side of it. As Fubuki extended her telekinetic powers, the monster flesh would begin to shift before an unconscious Psychos would burst through with tremendous force. Once she had gotten a hold of her, Fubuki would tell Mountain Ape and Eyelashes to hit the gas. A delirious Psychos would then look up to the woman holding her. And instead of seeing Fubuki as an enemy, Psychos saw her as her president, like when they were still in school. But from there, the cars were off. We then skip ahead to a few hours later, just outside of Hero Association headquarters, where the news network owned by the Hero Association would cover this apparent monster massacre. It would also be reported that the group of demon-level monsters were all defeated by Tatsumaki. One of the residents would recount how terrified they were. Then there was a guy with gold teeth and sunglasses that was completely sold on the value of an S-class hero. Then two fangirls would express their appreciation for Tatsumaki, and watching this broadcast was the family from before that saw what actually happened. and nearly got flattened by Tatsumaki's rampage. But now seeing a more optimistic possibility, the little kid from before would happily champion Tatsumaki again, despite her being terrifying when she's fighting. Saitama was watching this broadcast too, and was really annoyed by all the lies. And considering he was the one that stopped Tatsumaki, it was as if they were all calling him a monster. Because of this, Genos would immediately call to file a complaint. But suddenly, Saitama would manifest the ability to enlarge his ears as he heard that the estimated cost of damages were in the billions. After hearing that, he gently lowered Genos' phone from his ear. When Genos turned around to look at him, Saitama put on his Chad face while he pretended to take the high ground by letting Tatsumaki have her moment to shine. Genos was stunned by this. And then, just like the good old days of One Punch Man, he'd begin to furiously take note of the perceived generosity in Saitama's heart as Saitama himself ordered more ramen. Meanwhile, it was reported that Psychos had escaped. While meeting with many executives, Tatsumaki would push the narrative that Psychos must have gotten out through a hole in the ceiling or floor during all the chaos and confusion. Admitting the issue to be her fault, Tatsumaki was prepared to take full responsibility by taking sole control over these search efforts. A prospect that clearly upset many of the executives who couldn't fathom that the reason for all this trouble believed that she was in any position to make demands. But when Tatsumaki pointed out that all the residents trust them again because of her, along with the fact that they'll be able to cover up their mismanagement, nobody was able to continue arguing. She then downplayed the threat of a dragon-level monster, saying that it's all the same as long as she brings Psychos back quickly enough. And because she has the wave pattern of Psychos' power totally memorized, she was by far the person best suited to hunt her down. With all that said, Tatsumaki would begin to take her leave while telling them not to involve any other heroes since they'd only get in her way. To this, Mr. McCoy contemplated. From there, he would express his surprise towards Tatsumaki's sudden generosity. Pausing for a moment to look back at him as she approached the brighter expanse, Tatsumaki would then say that some days she's just in a good mood. And after getting to know Saitama, I bet she's having a good day. Mr. McCoy would chuckle at this before expressing his appreciation. Meanwhile, someone else entirely was completely onto their scheme. Totally shocked, Child Emperor would think to himself how he thought the incident looked suspicious from the very beginning. And after a bit of hacking, it became clear to him that the entire thing was full of fraud and cover-ups. And so I'm really curious if Child Emperor will be added to the list of characters that know Saitama's secret. Let me know what your guesses are in the comments. As always, I'm Celeste Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.